See what it says.
Got it.
All right. And let's go ahead and open with prayer. Oh, creating God, you created a world of abundance. You flung millions of stars across the sky. You created all these different plants and trees and animals and humans, and you said it was very good. But we sometimes forget that you are a God of abundance, that your heart is generous, that you overflow with love and goodness and mercy and grace. And sometimes we choose scarcity. Sometimes we choose to live lives that feel a little pinched because we've forgotten your generous, abundant heart. So tonight, as we discuss stewardship, I pray that your generous spirit will flow in and through and among us when we feel ourselves shrink a little bit at the idea of opening up our own generous hearts. Just give us that little nudge. Help us to be more like you in all that we say and do. Because that's your desire for this world, that your will be done on earth by us as it is in heaven. So guide us this evening as you do every day. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Well, welcome for this month's 1-hour training. And as you heard me say, we are going to be looking at stewardship. And as promised, I am going to do my best to try to introduce you to different resources, a different way of thinking about the topic. And because God is so good and God is so generous, I'll be honest, rushing a little bit after the Presbyterian meeting on Tuesday, and my first major paper for my Doctor of Ministry course was due on Wednesday, yesterday. So I was a little pressed. And yesterday, this amazing article came out in the Daily Presbyterian News Service about stewardship. And I breathed a sigh of relief and said a prayer of gratitude. So that will be the focus, this article. It actually pulled together a lot of the things that I was hoping to kind of talk through with you. So it felt truly like a God-given thing. So stewardship, not a season, but a reason. And the link to the article is right there where it says article. And when you get the PDF of the presentation, you'll be able to click on that to read the article itself. The article, as you see, was written by Nancy Crow for the Presbyterian Foundation based on a presentation Olanda Carr gave at Stewardship Kaleidoscope. Yeah, lots of great resources just on this one slide, and we haven't even started. Okay, so Olanda starts with some what if questions. And these are great what if questions. You could take these and have some really rich conversation with the session, with the Board of Deacons, really with every committee and every group in the church. What if stewardship was about abundance and not scarcity? What if that was the framework we approached this question with? Not there isn't enough, not, how can we eke out a little more, but how can we tap into the abundance that people have within themselves, the abundance that we have been created to give. And I want to remind us that stewardship is not just about money, right? It's not just about what we put in an offering plate or what we give online. It's not just about dollars. Stewardship is truly about a way of life. I mean, in the beginning, when God created the heavens and earth, God told us as humans to be stewards. of all of creation, all of creation. And there wasn't even money at that time because there was no need for it. So when we talk about stewardship as only relating to how people give financially, we have missed this beautiful possibility. Stewardship is about time. It's about talent. It's about presence. It's about the earth. It's about all of creation. And so, second what if question, I'm going to get preaching. Sorry, I don't get to do, typical stewardship sermons anymore. What if stewardship was a reason instead of a season? You may be familiar with the phrase that comes out around December, Jesus is the reason for the season. Well, what if stewardship was part of our reason for being, part of what guided us in all of our decision making, not just our budgeting? What if thinking about how we are called to be stewards of a building, stewards of ministry, stewards of mission? What if that language began to infuse everything we do as the people of God? Because it was part of the reason we were created. What if stewardship is a reason and not just a few months in the church calendar to help us meet our budget needs? When we cultivate stewardship as a joyous discipline, part of what happens, using Olanda's words, is that grateful giving is the church's antidote to the consumerism and materialism of our age. When we cultivate stewardship and generosity as part of our spiritual life, that we give out of our gratitude towards God, we give out of sense of being connected to one another and in relationship and community with one another. When we do that, we are doing something that is different from what the world expects. We don't give for any reason other than it is part of our spiritual discipline. We don't give to get something back. We give out of a joyous discipline. And so it is meant to be about how we live our lives. And yes, it is about how we spend our money. Scholars tell us, it's common knowledge that Jesus talked more about money than prayer. Okay, so if you go through the gospel stories and all the things Jesus talked about, all the things he addressed, the disciples asked him, Lord, teach us to pray. They requested that. They expected the teacher to teach them how to pray. But Jesus talks a lot about money when he hasn't been asked to. In fact, you can get a pretty clear sense in the Gospels that often people wished he would talk less about money. And that's part of the reality. If we will be honest, we've got some interesting relationships with money that filter into our life as followers of Jesus. Part of our challenge as leaders in the church is to refocus expectations. That in the church, generosity, stewardship, gratitude, those are founding principles. Not getting something for something, not getting my money's worth. No, that's not what being church is about. And hopefully we're grateful to God year-round and not just when it's time to fill out a pledge card. Hopefully, every day we have a sense of God's blessings in our lives. Hopefully, every day we are able to look and know that we have something to be grateful for. I know even in my hardest days, as you know, my dad died in June when I got that phone call. Well, those of you who have been through the loss of a parent or a loved one, the world crumbles. The world crumbles a bit. It's not the same place it was that moment before. And yet that very day, I was grateful for the ways friends reached out, the rest of the family reached out, my colleagues here in the Presbytery reached out. I was grateful for my sense of God's presence in the midst of one of the hardest things that had ever happened to me. So hopefully we all have moments of gratitude to God every day, which means our stewardship, our response in gratitude, our generous hearts and lives are part of how we show that gratitude to God. All right? Okay. So one of the things Orlando talks about is, instead of having a stewardship committee, which most of our churches and our members associate only with money, to instead form a generosity team. Do you feel the difference in that language? So instead of talking about stewardship, we're talking about generosity, invitations to people to share abundance, to share out of what they have received. And so when we rethink the language we use, we set a different tone. So as you think through stewardship and stewardship season, begin to think about how you can change the words, change the message. So it's not about, we need you to give so the church stays open, which may be true. That may be true, that we need you to give so the church stays open. We need you to give so we can pay our bills. We need you to give because we have obligations we need to meet, and we will only meet those if the congregation responds financially. That may be true, but that's not the message you want to share. You instead want to invite people to be a part of this community of faith where people learn how to love God and how to be loved in return. Do you hear the difference? Do you feel the difference? So choosing our words and thinking about what we're communicating with the tone we use, with the language we use, is an important part of lifting up stewardship as more than just this one faceted thing. And Olanda invites us to think about generosity teams as something different than a traditional stewardship committee. So most of us in our stewardship committees have the treasurer, if we have a financial secretary, that person will be on the stewardship committee, somebody who's responsible for counting offerings or paying attention to the budget. That's usually how we assemble a stewardship subcommittee. Instead, a generosity team is made up of people who know the mission and ministry of the congregation. Now, hopefully your treasurer is able to articulate the mission and ministry behind the different account subcategories. Hopefully the treasurer is able to say, well, the reason our heating bill is so high is because we opened our church up during the coldest days to make sure that nobody was sleeping outside. If your treasurer can do that, then that person knows the story of mission and ministry in the church and is a great person to have on a generosity team. But people like a deacon who can talk about how the congregation cares for the congregation itself and extends that care to the larger community. Those who are involved in hands-on mission and ministry inside the church and outside of the walls. People who can tell the story. Again, do you hear the difference between, we have $5,000 for mission in the budget, so we need you to give so we can do this, to, let me tell you about the mission we accomplished this year because of your generosity, because of the way your abundance was expressed in our church. Really different way of saying essentially the same thing. Okay. Orlando uses the image of a choir in the article that is the link that's there. He uses the image of a choir coming together, that you need more than one voice, you need more than one skill, and choirs usually rehearse at least 9 months out of the year, and then maybe special music during the summer. Choirs get together and they practice with one another. They figure out how to help each other learn their parts, and they create something beautiful together. Alonda likens a generosity team to a choir and lifts up stewardship, as you see, as a form of worship and discipleship. So this is one of my pet peeves. I will admit it completely and wholly and honestly in your midst. I hate it. I hate it when in the middle of worship offering, the time of offering is approached as an obligation and not a joyful opportunity. Oh, it hurts my heart, because this is where we are invited to respond to God's goodness. The offering is when we are invited to respond out of gratitude for what God has done for us. And to hear it instead as something that is obligatory and dry and a sense of duty, oh, it hurts my heart. If we can, again, change the way we think about stewardship so that we frame it as abundance and we frame it as a sense of generosity and gratitude, then the ways we take up our offerings will also change. Now we are inviting people to give out of what they have already received, give out of what God has first given to them, to give out of joy, gratitude. Yeah. A different take. And so that article, I commend it to you. It's got some fun language that might help you talk about, maybe we can do this differently. It could be too late this year, that's okay. Part of what I'm about to get to suggests that this is a year-long thing. And so starting in January with something new, something that hinges on generosity and gratitude, well, that makes sense. And that might give you enough time to lay the groundwork to give this a try. So a generosity team. And part of what that generosity team does is they tell that story. Don't we love a good story? That's why we watch movies, it's why we watch TV, and our news channels understand that we want a story. And so even the news is packaged for us in stories and sound clips that tell something from beginning to middle to end. And so our generosity team is helping us tell the story. What are we here for? How are we impacting our community? For church vitality, one of the primary questions that we ask congregations is, if you close the doors of the church, if the church finished its mission and closed the doors, would your community notice? If the answer is no, it's an opportunity to begin to ask some questions about what God is calling you to do, who God is calling you to be, why you have been planted in the place where you have been planted. Hopefully the answer is yes. So how do you tell that story? How do you communicate that to the people who may not be directly connected to your mission and ministry? And so part of that, the second bullet point, is also inviting people. So if stewardship is a year-long thing, if it is a reason instead of a season, if generosity is something we are invited to cultivate, if gratitude is something we are invited to express day in and day out, then inviting people into that activity in the church is part of what we're doing. And again, it's not just by giving money. The church I served in Massachusetts had a lot of members who were just financially always on the edge. They were just barely making it by. And so I was really intentional when I talked about stewardship to be sure to say, there are a lot of ways to express gratitude for God's goodness. And we had members who really couldn't do more than a couple dollars a week in an offering plate, offer other gifts and talents that made our life as the body of Christ richer and helped us tell our story better. One member in particular was an amateur photographer wanting to start growing that business. And so that was what was offered in the place of putting money in the plate. This person said, I can take pictures. I can take pictures during worship, during activities. I can take pictures and help post them so that people know about us. And it had an impact. It had an impact. People seeing us across social media. We had waivers. We got permission before we posted anything. That's a different training session. But that person felt invited into the mission and ministry of the church, even though they couldn't participate at any significant way financially. So how do we invite people to engage in the mission and ministry in multiple ways? And then to take our different audiences into account. I can post the website in the chat. I will do that. Because we also have different generations in the church, right? And different generations respond better to different things. Some generations and some people will respond better to a phone call. Somebody calling and saying, let me tell you about what we're excited coming up in the life of the church. In 2022, we're going to XYZ. And so a phone call is the format that you use to tell the story. Other people may prefer an email or a video or a conversation, a small group gathering. So think about telling the story and inviting people into the reason for stewardship in a lot of different ways. We have so many social media platforms and so many ways to communicate that beginning to draw in some different ways may reach some people who have traditionally not participated because the message didn't really ever reach them. All right. About the budget. Budget. Yes, we all need budgets. Tuesday, we had a first read of the 2022 budget for the Presbytery. It is important. It is a way to be accountable to one another, and it is a way to set our goals for the coming year. But the church's budget is not the why of stewardship. It is a byproduct. So often what happens in lots of organizations is our sense of what money will be available, how much money will be available, drives the budget, which therefore determines the mission and ministry. So we put the budget together, and the budget determines where Jesus is calling us, which is not how Jesus actually usually works. Usually Jesus walks up and says, I see you there fishing on the side of the shore. Leave your nets. Come with me. I'll make you fishers of people. Whoa. That budget just got blown out of the water. Whew. So that's another place where we can shift our thinking, that the budget is a byproduct of stewardship, that we discern God's call, we crunch the numbers, yes, but the numbers reflect our sense of what God is wanting us to do, how we are being invited to live and minister in this world. And then the budget is a byproduct of that. So people are not invited to give to a budget, but to give out of generosity, out of gratitude, to ministry. That's another important shift. Don't ask people to give to support the budget. Instead, invite people into mission and ministry through their financial offerings. See that? See that little shift? And one of the ways you can do that is by using a narrative budget. And in just a few minutes, I'm going to introduce you to a website and a tool that helps with that. And so a narrative budget takes the list of accounts and the budget numbers, how much for the pastor's salary, how much to heat the church, how much for insurance. The narrative budget takes all of that and says, how many hours are people in the building? How does that express our mission and ministry? And so the narrative budget says this much of the budget that goes towards insurance, electricity, gas or oil, if you've got those things, maintenance, Wi-Fi, all those things, that the building is being used 65% of the time to support community outreach and community groups. So 65% of all of those, numbers for heating and snow plowing and, all those numbers, 65% of that's about mission. And a narrative budget pulls that out and helps show that while we may have administrative categories and salary categories, they all undergird the mission and ministry of the congregation. And if they don't, then it's appropriate to ask, is this a necessary use of the gifts God has entrusted to us? And Carr reminds us that church members give to ministry because ministry matters, that is why we gather together. So I want to introduce you to a tool, but also to a group. How many of you are familiar with the Presbyterian Foundation? I know some of you will be. Awesome. That's great, because they are one of our sister agencies in the Presbyterian Church USA. And a lot of what they do is support congregations, individual congregations, in things like stewardship. So they have this tool called Stewardship Navigator that is free. It's the best price ever, free, and open for any congregation to use. And that's the website, stewardshipnavigator.com. I'll put that in the chat in just a minute. And they call it a simple tool that helps raise funds for your mission. And so let me do this. I'm going to stop the share because I'm going to move to their little video about what they do. But there's the link to Stewardship Navigator. And I want to share their video with you. All right, give me a thumbs up if you can hear this.
Welcome to the Stewardship Navigator, a user-friendly online tool developed by church leaders for church leaders. We have everything your church needs to develop a thoughtful and dynamic stewardship program. Start with our calendar tool. It's packed with ideas of what to do and when. Scheduling has never been so easy. Use our checklist for step-by-step tips. We also have templates that are easy to customize with your church's information. You can store them all in a single portal for your church's documents. That can make future edits easy and quick. Stumped by narrative budgets? Stewardship Navigator has a narrative budget creator built in. It guides you through each step and delivers a clear, attractive document to showcase how your budget directly impacts your mission. Interested in building or expanding your planned giving program? Our planned giving guide offers step-by-step plans and resources to conduct a meaningful and effective program that emphasizes your church's mission and calling. If you need help, we'll link you directly to your ministry relations officer, a real person ready to talk with you. Best of all, this doesn't cost a thing. The Stewardship Navigator is offered at no cost to your church as a ministry of the Presbyterian Foundation. Visit stewardshipnavigator.com today to start charting your course to successful stewardship.
Whew. So I'm going to go through the bullet points just so you've got them. So these are the included tools in that free resource. So you can check it out and you can say, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life, and it hasn't cost you anything. Usually when we learn stuff like that, we've already spent some money. But this one, you can use the smallest piece, you can use nothing, or you can dive into the whole thing. So based on the belief that stewardship is a year-round response to God's goodness, they have the campaign calendar tool to help you kind of think through how can we emphasize generous hearts, lives of gratitude on an annual basis, on a yearly, monthly basis. They've got those step-by-step checklists, which if you're someone like me can be really super handy. Those document templates, just so helpful. You know, how do you write a good letter that asks people to give to ministry and not to a budget? There's a template for that. How do you write a good thank you note, thanking people for their involvement, their engagement in mission and ministry? Now there's a template for that, and you can customize it. And that narrative budget tool is fantastic. It can be really challenging to put together a good narrative budget, because how do you figure out how much of the church administrator's salary, if you have one, how much of that supports mission and ministry? How much of it supports administration? Oh, you can spend a lot of time crunching numbers and percentages. The narrative budget tool is a huge help if that's something you think would be meaningful for your congregation. And then, of course, planned giving. Planned giving is part of our stewardship. It's our stewardship beyond the time we're here on earth. Do we intend to leave a legacy? Do we intend that however little or however much we have after we die is shared with our faith community? Having upfront conversations with church members and using the planned giving tools to do that can be really life-giving. As Christians, we should be able to talk about death and dying. We're one of the few groups that has within our faith the belief that it's not the end, that we are people who proclaim resurrection, that God's final word isn't spoken when we draw our last breaths. And so talking about that in the church and talking about gratitude and generosity that can be expressed after death is a gift. It honestly is a gift to our members. So another thing that Presbyterian Foundation has is a toolbox, and I will bring us there as well. I'll put that link directly in the chat. There we go. So the toolbox is another place of resources. So this is separate than the Presbyterian, the Stewardship Navigator. And it's one of the gifts of the Presbyterian Foundation. They really, it is their mission and ministry to help us be better stewards of God's good gifts. So the foundation toolbox has bulletin inserts, articles, leadership guides, and more, as it says, to help you think through what stewardship as a reason could look like for your congregation. These are the, as you see, many categories: annual stewardship and generosity, investments. How do you use investments? Personal financial planning, that can be for church members to access. Planned giving, an endowment, whether you have one or want to start one. Forms and applications, because that's part of our life. Capital campaigns, how do you do that? Special major gifts, if you are planning to invite particular people to make a large major gift, how do you go about doing that? Legacy giving programs, a special place for pastors to get worship help and sermon prep help for donors, and then a place where you can go and look at all the tools. And the Presbyterian Foundation, as they said, are available to partner with congregations. I know First Pres Newark had one of the vice presidents of the foundation and our previous ministry relations officer, Olanda, come out and walk the campus, do analysis of the finances, analysis of building use, analysis of the congregation where it is right now, and then meet with the session to talk about, here are your strengths, here are your weaknesses, here are your threats, here are your opportunities. They will do that with every congregation that asks. Every congregation that asks can have that level of engagement and involvement. To be fair, I'm friends with the vice president who came out and did that. So First Pres Newark may have gotten a little special treatment since my husband's the transitional pastor. So just to be fair. But every congregation who asks is given the opportunity to have that kind of hands-on response, I promise. And they're great. They're great at what they do. They have all these stewardship resources, including an annual Stewardship Kaleidoscope Conference. And lately, that's been online, and I expect going forward, it will always have a hybrid component. So if traveling to a conference is not in your personal budget or your church's budget, you will be able to participate online. Our ministry relations officer has recently changed. Olanda has been promoted to a new position. And our new ministry relations officer is actually the person I worked with in Boston and Presbyterian of Northern New England, Ellie Johns Kelly. She has already reached out to see when she can come and visit and begin to be familiar with our presbytery. That's how responsive and hands-on they are. And if you do not yet have online giving, which more of our churches do now than they did 18 months ago, the Presbyterian Foundation offers online giving at a very competitive rate. There will always be some cost to process online financial gifts. That is just part of the reality of how money works in the world. The foundation's online giving portal, of course, has a fee. It's competitive, and it goes back into one of our sister organizations. So if you don't have online giving yet, it's easy to set up. You can get a link on your website. And again, they will work with you to do that. So I'm going to summarize and then stop screen sharing and pull those other links for you. So here's the biggest thing. Here's the biggest thing I hope you can take away, that we are invited to shift how we think about stewardship. That stewardship is about generosity. And it's not about meeting a budget. It's about our gratitude towards everything that God has done. So generosity expressed through our stewardship it's actually an essential part of our spiritual life as Christians. The fact that Jesus talked about money more than prayer tells me, it actually has convicted me that what I do with my money is perhaps more important than how fervently I pray. How I express generosity on a daily basis actually is a form of prayer. It actually is. And so if we can make that shift internally ourselves, and if we can help our congregations make that shift, we will see generous givers. We will also see a different spirit, a spirit of abundance and gratitude instead of a spirit of scarcity and what's in it for me. And it is year round, because our gratitude hopefully is every day, or at least regular. So to begin to think about stewardship not as 2 or 3 months meant to get all the pledges in, but instead something that is part of our rhythm, part of our life and ministry and mission together. And that there are a lot of tools. The Presbyterian Foundation are the tools that I am most familiar with, but there are so many stewardship tools out there. So if there is another place that fits your congregation better, fits the way that you approach mission and ministry together better, go for it. Go for it. Use what works. But through it all, I hope that we can begin to really develop that sense of generosity and gratitude, that this is what we're invited into, and that it touches all parts of our life, not just the money in the bank. All right, I'm going to stop the screen share. I'll pull those links for you. So the link to the first article is here. And then the link to Yolanda's article about generosity teams being like a choir there. Was that it? Stewardship Navigator and Toolkit. Here, I'll do this last one as well. All right, and here's the link to the website where they talk about partnering with churches. So any questions, any conversation, anything that you are curious in hearing more about or want to push back on, that's okay too.
Well, this is totally a change, to put it nicely. I mean, I love it. I think it just makes so much more sense. But in my church, I don't know how you would even approach that,
Yeah.
given that our congregation is, elderly and senior and set in their ways.
Which is true of
Head
many
of Christiana.
Yeah, well, but it's true of, it's just true across.
Yeah.
And so you may have to start small. You may have to start with the session. You may have to start with the central leadership, and that's okay. It's okay to start small. For me, this started honestly, I was 3 years into my first call, so I've been ordained for 3 years. doing a sermon series for stewardship season, writing my sermon. And for me, it started because I convicted myself writing about tithing. I was so angry with God about that. It's like, what? That's not what I was doing here. But because I got convicted, I started small personally, and then started talking with leadership and moving from there. And putting the name of a book in the chat called Ask, Thank, Tell by Charles Lane. And that's a short book. It has a lot of the same principles that Olanda offered in the work he did that I stole shamelessly from for this. But that may be a good place to start, to pick up a book like that, a short book, and study that together. Maybe on a stewardship committee, if that's what you have. And
Right.
starting small is okay. Jim.
Going back to the services offered by the stewardship foundation that you referenced being used at First Pres, I would encourage churches to utilize that. It's not an overnight process where they can just come in and say, look at your books and things like that. There is a lot of data gathering, but it's been well worth it for our purposes of looking at the dynamics of giving, getting into the demographics of giving, and then suggestions on how we could change our budget process, a budget process that probably goes back 15 years. And whether we'll adapt to their approach or not is yet to be seen, but it certainly gives us a different way of looking at things. So I would encourage folks to avail themselves of that service.
Thank you.
Cindy, what's the best approach to do that? Through you or?
So the website, presbyterianfoundation.org/churches, that is one place to go. But if your session says, yeah, we want to do this, if you let me know, I will connect you with Ellie Johns Kelly. And
Okay, thank you.
As our ministry relations officer. In fact, I will see if I'm smart enough.
Cindy, that's how we got it started. At the time, Olanda was our relations officer, and that's how we got it started, was through him. So, frankly, probably just called it to Ellie would be just fine.
Yeah, and I just put the link to Ellie's page on the Presbyterian Foundation website in the chat for you. So that's another way to do that.
Okay.
Scott.
Yeah, I just wanted to let people know that, last year I discovered the Stewardship Navigator when I came on session, and the narrative budget seemed just very intriguing and the way to go. But I just want to say you need someone financially adept to figure out how to partition the pastor and the church and all those things. It's not a trivial exercise. We decided not to do it last year. We're hoping to do it this year. But just sort of a warning that it's a great idea, but it's not the easiest thing to partition. And of course, the more you partition, we decided to sort of do three things. And then there's something on there where you can put your church's financial information into the system, and it compares your church with Presbyterian churches all over the country. My only complaint there, and I think I communicated that to Olanda last year, was that it was about 2 or 3 years behind. So, I don't know whether the pandemic had anything to do with it. I just think it's a matter of trying to get all that data in and analyzed. And our church is a new pastor. It's changed in the last 3 years, so it would be good to get that more up to date. And then the only other thing I would mention is that I read a book, Not Your Parents' Offering Plate by J. Cliff Christopher, which I would highly recommend to anyone. And maybe I can put that in the chat room too.
Yeah.
But it's a whole other way of looking at how a church goes about putting their stewardship budget. And it mentions a lot what you were talking about in terms of abundance and being grateful. But I think a lot of us will recognize the churches we grew up in that book and some of the suggestions to change that. So just something I recommend.
Because that's an important point, that giving patterns are also different generationally. And, you can't ever paint an entire generation of individuals as one monolithic thing. It doesn't work. But there are overarching themes that you can point out. And one of the things we are seeing more and more is that millennials, who are the young adult generation at this point, they give to causes they are passionate about. May not be a lot, maybe $5 or $10, but if they are passionate about something, they are generous, and they're generous with their time. They want to be, again, it's a large group, very diverse group of people, but overall, they want to be involved in hands-on activities that help make the world a better place. They have a greater sense of urgency about injustice, about climate change, and they will give of their time and their money to organizations that are dealing with that. Unfortunately, the church doesn't often look like an organization that is dealing with those things. And so that's one of those places of disconnect. We don't tell our story well. We don't connect with how what we're doing is addressing these urgent concerns for our neighbors. And therefore, young adults are looking at the church and saying, that doesn't interest me. I'm going to go volunteer down the street. Yeah. Mark, I thought you had your hand raised.
I did, but I'm looking at the time, and I've got to start a Bible study here in about a minute. Maybe I could
Yes.
maybe I could say it real quick, just to kind of offer a different take on Stewardship Sunday that worked for me up in my churches in New York, to smaller, older congregations, and something we're considering here. But rather than sort of a kind of traditional Stewardship Sunday kind of model, we went with, we called it Recommitment Sunday, and it was working smart, where we used, it was both an opportunity to talk about stewardship, but also membership, and offering people the opportunity to discern, their active membership in the church, and then lifting up the joy of being part of the community together that gives and worships and laughs and and just loves loving Jesus together, kind of stuff. And it worked pretty well. And then the offering was not a pledge card per se, but a recommitment to active participation and giving of time, talent, resource, etc. So it worked really well, and just throwing that out there as something to think about.
That's awesome, and well in line with the idea that stewardship is about all of who we are, not just the money in the bank. So we are at our time. I hope you enjoyed talking about stewardship. Maybe you were surprised to enjoy it a little bit. But yeah, the more joy we can bring into just life in general, but also into the church, and also into our conversations about stewardship and generosity and gratitude, the better off I think we'll be. And we can start small. We start where we are, no matter where that is. And from there, we can take a step. So many, many blessings. This will be posted along with the PDF in the tomorrow's Friday. So probably not until early next week. But it will be posted on that training web page for you to share as you desire. So blessings on you all, And may you have lots of reasons to be grateful for what God is doing in and around and through you every day. We'll see you next month.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.